Jou openbaringsstasie.
Isikhululo sakho esikutyhilela ubungcwele.
Kingfisher FM.
An organization representing the Christian View Network. We're joined once again by Philip Rosenthal on the line from that organization. He will have the opportunity this coming week to make presentations to the NCOP Justice Committee. They are very, very busy at the moment with regards to hearing a lot of public hearings, and various ministers are going to be presenting before them. But Philip Rosenthal will be having a 10 to 20 minute slot to unpack a little bit of the concerns around the hate speech bill when it comes to our freedom and our freedom of expression to serve our King. So he joins us on the line. They're going to be live streaming this event. You can catch it Thursday at 5:40 in the evening if you want to tune into that on YouTube. That'll be an important opportunity. So, Philip, thank you for representing, and thank you for joining us on the line to unpack a little bit of the case studies around this, and also to share concerns around the hate speech bill. Thank you for your time.
Hi there. Yes, I think that this all becomes more real if we look at examples of real people who have been persecuted for what they've said, and I think there's many examples of this, but one of the examples that happened in South Africa was a person called Simeon Chetty, who was street preaching, and he said something that was offensive to Hindu people. Certainly wasn't hate speech, but they found it offensive, and they sued him in terms of the Equality Act, and he had to spend a whole lot of time in stress and with lawyers trying to defend himself against the claims for R1 million of damages, basically around his comparison between Jesus and the Hindu god Krishna. Now, that was a civil case under existing law, but this would make it a criminal case, which means that the person who found guilty could face up to 8 years in jail, which is more than the penalty for burglary. So we're saying that's really ridiculous. Another case example of this is the vice president of the University of Cape Town, SRC, a few years back, made a comment about so-called same-sex marriage, and she was accused of hate speech by the other people on the SRC, and people kind of rioted and bullied her and tried to push her off the Student Representative Council. Now, ultimately, she was found innocent by the investigation of the university's legal panel, but this is an example of how opposing ideologies are seeking to silence Christians from speaking biblical truth in the public arena and just try to keep them into the spaces of the church. There's also a Finnish member of parliament who's actually on criminal trial at the moment for the allegation of hate speech for posting something on Instagram, a Bible verse on the subject of homosexuality. So we don't want this bill to go through, because then that can put not only Christians but other people who air controversial views at risk of similar criminal prosecution. Also, journalists who might say something that is politically offensive, that then somebody claims that they're guilty of hate speech. And what we've seen is that when all the hate speech cases that we've seen come before our courts, they tend to get really emotional and sadly very often are inconsistent. So in one case the judge might rule harshly, on another case gently, and so you don't know what the outcome's going to be. So we would argue that firstly we don't need this bill, but if they are going to have the bill, then they need to very narrowly and clearly define what they regard as hate speech and what is not hate speech. And the way that this bill is worded at the moment is completely vague. They just say, well, if something causes social harm, then that could be hate speech. What is social harm? My opinion of social harm is different to your opinion of social harm. And they've put in a religious exemption clause, but that exemption clause has got a loophole in it, which enables them to just basically ignore it. So we're wanting them to make lots of changes to this bill, unless they want to scrap it altogether, which would reduce the risk of innocent people going to jail. But otherwise, this can make people afraid to speak up, similar to a country like China or Russia or Zimbabwe or Saudi Arabia. We don't want that in South Africa. We want people to be able to express their views, even if they are not culturally or politically considered correct.
Thanks for highlighting that, Philip. Do you think that there's been enough of an outcry from the general community and from various organizations to garner the serious scrutiny of this bill by the NCOP?
Well, I'm very encouraged by the number of submissions that were made online and people sending in emails and such like, and there's many weighty organizations who put in submissions to influence this, such as the National Editors Forums expressed views against this bill. But at the same time, we've got a strong lobby that is pushing for the bill, often strongly funded by foreign organizations and not necessarily expressing the views of South Africans. But that is the direct influence on Parliament, but it's a concern to me that I don't think there has been enough public debate on this, and so a lot of people would still not really be even aware of this, and I think that they might not wake up until there's actually a specific person who is now threatened with going to jail or actually does go to jail, because most people are not really abstract thinkers. Most people are interested in other people, but the difficulty is that if we wait for a real individual to go to jail, that's too late. We need to stop this thing now.
Yeah, I guess under the auspices of calling it a hate speech bill, people think it's something good, but they don't understand the complexities or the nuances in this bill, and that's probably led to why not a lot of people have expressed, I would imagine, outrage or discontent that this could actually regress our country's freedom and limit our freedom of expression.
Well, I'm not calling it in much of my writings, I'm not calling it the hate speech bill. I'm calling it the hated speech bill, because it is, in actual fact, the things that people are tending to want to criminalize are what they hate, what they don't want to hear. But I think that there's many very small and simple changes that they could make to this bill, which would make the thing safer and less of a risk for innocent people to going to jail. But I think that many of the politicians don't think that this bill could be used against them. In fact, one of the political parties actually said to me, well, they will support this bill so long as it's not used against them. And that is impossible.
Yeah.
Because you can't stop a law from being used against yourself. It applies equally to anybody. And so, in fact, there's a Prime Minister of Pakistan who was having to face hate speech charges for something controversial that he said. Former Prime Minister Imran Khan, he didn't anticipate this being used against him, and the same thing could happen to one of our politicians. So it's not actually in anybody's interest. This is actually just a very, very unwise thing to do if they're going to make something as loosely worded as it is. I mean, it's because it's basically it's a shotgun approach, and rather than a targeted approach, and so you don't know what's going to get hit as a result of this if somebody in the government decides to prosecute something that they don't like.
No, very well stated. Tell me, Philip, is this the last stop? If the NCOP says, well, we're going to push it through, then there's simply nothing we can do? No,
there are more opportunities. The thing is that the NCOP, we hope, will listen at least to some of what we're asking for. After that, it would go back to the National Assembly, who to the National Council of Provinces for a vote, and then after the committee's finished with it, and then it would go to the President, and we would argue strongly to the President's lawyers that this bill should not be signed in its current form because it's not constitutional. It's restricting freedom of expression unjustifiably, and we hope that they would listen to that. But if they don't, the next step is to take the bill to court, and there are organizations which are planning to do that, and I think that any organization which cares about this thing would want to join in such a court action and speak up for free speech, and then after that, if it does become law, well, then there will be the individual cases that we will probably have to give our backing to people who are persecuted in terms of this law. But at every point along that train, we want to try and stop it.
Philip Rosenthal, representing Christian View Network, thank you so much for your time and for representing an important viewpoint on the hated speech bill, on the hate speech bill. If they don't like your speech, then you could land yourself in some serious trouble if it doesn't align with the views expressed by the liberal movement, if I can put it that way. Philip, thank you so much, encouraging all of us to pray for discernment, for wisdom, and for open doors and grace when it comes to the NCOP presentations that will be taking place this week. Philip, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sam.
Isikhululo sakho senkuthazo.
Your inspiration station, Kingfisher FM.